All right, today we're looking at, first of all, paragraph 46, which is Christ's authority to forgive sin. Fascinating passage. Found in Matthew 9, 1 to 8, Mark 2, 1 to 12, and Luke 5, 17 to 26. So we see that he is, according to Matthew, getting in a boat, crossing over the Sea of Galilee, coming to his own city. Mark gives us a further explanation, as does Luke then once he is in that place. All right, so number 147, even though he grew up in Nazareth, what city did Jesus consider his home? Joel?
Capernaum.
Right, Capernaum. Any questions? Number 148, how many, oh wait a minute, there's something else. We see in Luke, and let's see if it's in, yeah, it's just in Luke, I think. It says that as he was teaching, the Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. All right, so there were some, sort of an official delegation there. Now, do you remember before when we talked about how the Sanhedrin would respond to someone that they thought could be the Messiah or was making messianic claims? Do you remember the two stages that the Sanhedrin would respond? Anybody remember that? Jonas?
Interrogation.
The interrogation would be the second stage. What was the first stage? Observation. All right, and keep that in mind as we go along here. All right, so question 148, how many men brought the paralytic to Jesus? Sean?
4.
Right, 4. That should have been too hard to figure out, right? Number 149, what obstacle did these men face? Griff?
The crowd.
The crowd. Could you be a little more specific? What about the crowd? Or what about the crowd made them face an obstacle? Sean?
They weren't able to get in, just so many people.
Into what?
Where Jesus was.
Which is where? Where was Jesus? Hmm? Yeah, so he was in a house, right? And presumably he is living in the same house as Peter and his family. So that's probably where this is taking place. So people can't get, these guys can't get in because it's so crowded. There's so many people that they're coming outdoors. The windows, if there weren't any. All right, so the house was so full, no one could get in. Any question about your answer? We'll take the crowd, but let's try to picture exactly what's going on here. All right, so 150. How did they solve their problem?
They
Landon?
lowered him through the roof.
Yeah, what did they have to do first before they lowered him through the roof?
They'd take the tiles off the roof.
Yeah, so they had to take the roof apart. Now, there were different kinds of roofs in that time, in different houses, but apparently this one had tiles on it so that they were able to remove the tiles. I don't know if you've ever seen a tiled roof. Usually they're kind of overlapping tiles, and you can pull them off if you need to. Maybe you've even seen in movies. You know, if people slide down a tiled roof and they grab on, the tiles come with them sometimes. You ever seen that in a movie or TV show? So this would be flat instead of at a slope. And so they're taking the tiles off of the roof so that they can get in because the crowd is so big. Now, what do you suppose was happening in the crowd as these guys are taking tiles off the roof? Do you think anybody noticed? You think they would? Do you think they would have noticed? Oh, tiles being removed above their heads. When you if they're removing something, when you think some dust and dirt would be falling down on people, what's going on up there, right? What do you think they thought was going on? What do you think the crowd was thinking as they saw these guys up above them removing tiles? Maybe the same as you right now. They were dumbfounded. Is that it, Morgan?
Why aren't they waiting in line like the rest of us?
Yeah, why aren't they waiting in line like the rest of us? Because we would tend to think that way, right? Unfair advantage. Well, maybe, why didn't I think of that? If they're further away from Jesus. All right, so they remove the tiles from the roof so they can lower their friend down. 151, what is the additional information that Luke tells us about the roof? We've already mentioned it. Haley, what do you have there? Made of tiles, yeah. The other writers don't tell us that, Luke does. Any question there? Number 152, whose faith was emphasized? And this is maybe a little surprising. Whose faith was emphasized? Noah?
The man's faith.
No, that's not what Jesus says. Luke?
The men carrying the paralyzed.
Right, the men who were carrying the paralytic, their friend, his friends' faith is what Jesus emphasized. How do we know that?
They brought him that far.
But how do we know that that's what's emphasized here? That's true. How do we know that that's what Jesus is talking about? Jonas?
In the passage it says when Jesus saw their faith.
Yeah, plural. When he saw their faith. That can't be the one guy, right? So it's got to be referring to his friends. And then how was this faith evidenced? Number 153. Emma?
How they got to Jesus even though it was tough.
Yeah, they went through a lot of obstacles to get their friend to Jesus. Right. Any question about your answer? In fact, they even brought him to Jesus, evidences their faith. Number 154, what did Jesus do when he saw the faith of the men bringing the paralytic? Again, this is kind of surprising. Noel?
He forgave their sins.
He forgave, I'm not sure I'd say their sins. Whose sins? Luke?
Paralytic.
The paralytic. He seems to be addressing him. So he forgave the sins of the paralytic. All right, now when you read that, did that cause any questions in your mind? He sees the faith of the guy's friends, and then he turns to the guy and says, your sins are forgiven. Is there a connection? I mean, normally we just see a connection between the faith of other people and forgiving the sins of this person. Not normally, right? And in addition, is that why they brought him? Is that why they went through all the trouble bringing this guy to Jesus so Jesus could forgive his sins? Is it? No. So that had to be surprising to them too. It was a surprise to everybody, except Jesus. But of course, Jesus knows what the real problem is. See, the man's real problem was not that he was paralyzed, was it? That's just a physical problem. His real problem was that he was a sinner. Think about the woman at the well, too. What was her problem? Her problem was not that she had to come in the heat of the day to get water. Her real problem was her sin. Right? You see that over and over again. Jesus knows what the real problem is. Number 155, thinking question. Why does Jesus say, take heart, my son? Who thinks they have an answer there? Anybody think of an answer? Luke?
They saying like forgiving sins is more important than physical healing.
Yeah. So you're coming for physical healing, guy, but take heart. I got something better than that. Okay. Anybody have an answer similar to what Luke said? Okay, Luke, take a bonus point on that. 156. The religious leaders thought that Jesus was guilty of what sin? Amelia? What was that?
Telling lies.
No, they don't. I don't think they accuse him of telling lies. What is it, Sam?
Blaspheming.
Blaspheming. They accuse him of blaspheming. Now, number 157. Why did the scribes think Jesus was committing this sin? Why did they think he was blaspheming? What made them think that, Emma?
Because it said only God could forgive sins.
Right. Who are you to forgive sins? Only God can do that. You're putting yourself in the place of God. That's blasphemy. Do you see their thinking? Now, the question is, were they correct? Were they correct in not in accusing Jesus of blasphemy? Were they correct in their statement, only God can forgive sins? Joel?
Yes, because people can only do things like that through the power of God.
Say that again?
I said yes because people can only do things like that through the power of God.
People can only do. Oh, you're talking about people forgiving other people's sins?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there is a place for us to forgive one another of something done to us. But can I forgive all your sins? Can I forgive the sin that you've done against other people?
No.
No. That's not within my authority. Can God? Yeah. In fact, even though David had sinned greatly against Bathsheba and against her husband Uriah, what did he say? In comparison, he said, "Against you and you only have I sinned." Speaking to God. That's where the sin really offends, is against God. So they were right in saying only God can forgive sins. Now, they're not talking about forgiving one another for things we do to each other. That's not what they're meaning, because this guy hadn't done anything against Jesus, right? Only God can forgive sins. So they were correct in their theology, but they were incorrect in not understanding who Jesus was. Number 158. Think about it. Why did the scribes and Pharisees not respond verbally to Jesus? So they're talking among themselves. But when Jesus says something to them, they don't respond. Why? Why don't they say anything? Anybody have an idea? Luke?
Because they couldn't like prove anything, so they just kept quiet. Like they couldn't prove that he wasn't.
Okay, that's a good try, but I don't think that's the answer. Joel?
They didn't know how to respond because they didn't know who Jesus was.
Well, they could actually ask a question, couldn't they? They could have said, "Who are you?" Right? But they don't.
They were in a large crowd and they didn't want Jesus to make them look foolish. Because if they ask a question and he gives a simple answer.
Yeah, but they don't. I don't think that might be true. But think about it. They're the ones that are the highly respected leaders. And think about, why are they there? Why are they even there? A few minutes ago, we talked about the response of the Sanhedrin to claims of messiahship or people that might be Messiah. Remember a few minutes ago? So what are these guys doing there? Luke?
They were just investigating, just watching.
They are in the first stage of observation. They're there because they've heard about Jesus. They are there to observe. And during the observation stage, they're not allowed to ask questions or to interact. They are only there to observe. So that's the real explanation why they don't say anything. That would be a bonus if anybody had it. Doesn't look like anybody did. Number 159, evaluate where the scribe should be were, not where. Were the scribes correct in their thinking? Well, we've already talked about that. Only God can forgive sins generally. We're not talking about personal sins against one another. All right. So how many of you had only God can can forgive sins. All right. We'll count that as a bonus point in case it seems like some of you might have trouble with that. All right, number 160, think. What did Jesus mean when he said, which is easier? So remember he said, what's easier, to say your sins are forgiven or take up your bed and walk? What did he mean by that? Jonas?
Because it was easy to just say you could forgive sins because you don't need proof. You can just say it, but if
Very
you tell
good.
someone to get up and walk, they
That's
can't
right.
Get up and
Because for Jesus to say your sins are forgiven, how do you know if they are or not? Right? You can't see it. You don't see the sins leaving. But if he says, get up and walk, what has to happen? The guy has to get up and walk. Otherwise, the person who says it is a fraud. Do you see what he's saying? He says, which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven or get up and walk? Well, it's a lot easier to say your sins are forgiven. But then he goes on to say, but in order to show you that I have the power to forgive sins, I have the authority to forgive sins, to do what you can't see, I'm going to do something you can see. I'm going to heal this guy. So, number 161, what did Jesus do to show that he had authority to forgive sins? He healed the man. Do you see? You see how the healing of the man was not done just out of a sense of being nice to somebody. It was done to prove a point. It was to show them that he had the power to forgive sins, which is to show them that he is God. Number 162. What 3 steps did Jesus instruct the paralytic to take? What's step number 1, Landon?
Rise.
Rise. What's step number 2, Noah?
Pick up your bed.
Pick up your bed. And what's the 3rd step, Amelia?
Go home.
Go home. All 3 points, 3 easy points. Rise, pick up your bed, and go home. Now think about it. Why do you tell them to go home? Why do you say, stick around and have some snacks?
He wants to tell everyone what happened.
Yeah, that may be it. He wants them to go home and tell everybody what happened. They're probably wondering, right? If he doesn't get home for a while, they're going to think something happened to him. So that may be it. Any other thoughts? Why did he tell them to go home? Now think about this. In order to go home, what would he have to do? So Jesus says, rise. He gets up, something he had, we don't know how long he was a paralytic, but something maybe he's never been able to do or not been able to do for a long time. He gets up and he picks up his bed, which is kind of a mat kind of thing. And Jesus says, go home. What would the next thing he'd have to do? What would he have to do immediately after picking up his mat? Walk. He'd have to walk. Not just stand up, but walk. And what's the next thing he would have to do? What's the next obstacle? Think about the situation. Where is he? What's the next thing he has to do?
You have to find his way out
What do you mean?
through the whole crowd.
Yeah, he's got to get through that crowd, right? Unless he jumps up to the ceiling and goes out that way. Maybe climbs the rope the guys used. But so he's got to push his way through the crowd. Now, what effect does that have on the crowd? Remember, they felt dirt falling from the ceiling. They look up and they see guys are tearing the roof apart. They're not waiting their turn. They lower this guy down in the middle of the whole crowd. And you can imagine people had to kind of step back as this mat's coming down through the ceiling. And then we go through the whole thing where Jesus forgives his sins and heals him. He gets up, he rolls up his mat, and now he's got to go through the crowd. Emma?
The crowd sees the man that was just paralyzed and walking.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a matter of him, zipping out real quick. He's got to go through all these people. Can you imagine a lot of the people in the crowd maybe couldn't even see what was going on? That's probably likely, right? You ever been in a crowd, in a room full of people that you could hardly move? It's hard to see what's going on. And so he actually has to have physical contact with a lot of these people trying, excuse me, coming through, right? And wait a minute, who's that guy? Is it that guy that's been paralyzed all his life? So that helps to spread not only the word of what happened, but also the credibility, because people were there and actually had physical contact with him. All right, any other thoughts there or comments? All right, 164, here's a speculate. Oh no, 163, right? What was the purpose of this miracle? Kind of already talked about this, but what do you have written down? What's the purpose of this miracle? Landon?
To show that he had authority to forgive the guy's sins.
Right. Any question about your answer? You got something like that? Luke?
I put that to show that he is God.
Okay. By the authority to forgive sins and healing the person. All right, now think about this. Those guys that are there, they're part of the delegation. What is Jesus communicating to them? They're there in their observation phase. So what is being communicated to them? Well, that kind of takes us into the next question. Let's go ahead and look at that. What report do you suppose they took back to the Sanhedrin? What do you think they said when they got back? Would they have said, we need to investigate this further, or would they have said, ignore this, this is nothing? Morgan?
Investigate further.
Don't you think that would be sufficient to say we need to keep our eye on this guy? We need to see more. We need to send the next team out to ask questions, right? Yeah, I certainly think so. So Jesus, in doing this, really is communicating to them that they have no basis for rejecting him as Messiah. And in fact, then, as they go back and report to the Sanhedrin, they certainly would give a report that said, we need to keep investigating because this guy did something miraculous. All right. Anybody have an answer for 164 that they want credit for? Morgan?
Yes, they took it back to the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin said that they're investigating.
Okay. All right. That's good. If you had about further investigation, that would be what we're looking for here. So give yourself a bonus point if you got that. All right, number 165. What two responses did the crowd display according to each gospel? What did Matthew say about the crowd? Sam?
They were afraid and glorified God.
Right. Those are the two things that Matthew records. We'll just count 1 point for getting both those for Matthew. Then what did Mark say? Lexi?
Amazed and glorified God.
Right, they were amazed and glorified God. And what did Luke say? Nate?
Filled with awe and glorified God.
Right. Amazement or filled with awe and glorified God. All right, so what's similar about all three?
They all glorified.
They all glorified God, right? Now, one says they were afraid, another was they're amazed, one filled with awe. Those are real similar. Afraid is kind of different than being amazed. But the end result is that the crowd was glorifying God. And that's really the ultimate goal of Jesus and should be for us as well, right? Any questions about that? So there'll be 3 points on number 165. Number 166. Oh, and that's the repetition. I have that question twice. All right. Any questions up through here? All right, we have about 5 minutes left. Let's see. 147 was, I'm sorry, paragraph 47. And you did 48 for today, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'll tell you what, we'll give you a break tonight. We'll go over paragraph 47 tomorrow, and also paragraph 48 tomorrow. All right?